Apogit Naskar once said, "A lot of time has been wasted by the nations of planet Earth on strategies of war. It is time we start organizing peace instead." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the rivalry between China and the United States displayed in Southeast Asia. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Thank you for subscribing, and share with your friends, share with your colleagues, share with your family, and inspire them to subscribe to our channel.
Well, indeed, Ross, we wanted to grow the subscription base here, so your assistance and help is very, very appreciated. We also wanted to thank our Patreon members for their continued support, and we wanted to let you know that we will be having live Zoom presentations on topics where we're going to dig deeper into the issues pertaining to geopolitics in the 21st century. So if you are interested, consider subscribing to our Patreon membership. And thank you all for your support. Back to our topic.
There is a growing rivalry, shocking I know, between China and the United States, as goes what's going on in Southeast Asia, most especially ASEAN. What's your opinion of all this?
Well, indeed, Ross, it's coming up to the surface now. It's becoming more open as to what China is doing, what the United States is doing, and who's going to win that match, the geopolitical match that is. So, well, indeed, ASEAN now are being put in delicate positions. But before we detail this, we'd like to share with our viewer what ASEAN stands for, and also the history, a brief one that is, about ASEAN. While ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It was established in, I believe, 1967, August 8th, if I'm not mistaken, by the 5 permanent members, or the founding members, they call them. It's Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, and Thailand. Then later on, 5 other members joined, like Brunei, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So each one at different years and so forth. So, but why ASEAN is important for us to understand, especially when you take that into the geopolitical context. It is important because ASEAN as a bloc, it's very powerful economically. I don't think so they are aware of it themselves.
You know, we might start to compare some numbers here.
Yeah.
And we take a look at not long ago when the total business with China among ASEAN members was $6-8 billion. What is it today?
Not anymore, Ross. It moved up to $434 billion.
That's more than a small difference.
It is. What it tells you right there, the economic strength of the ASEAN economy. Because ASEAN, the GDP for ASEAN is about $2.8 trillion, almost $3 trillion. So when you are dealing with an economy that size, with a consumer base of 650 million, you can just see why the United States now trying to influence ASEAN countries to move away from China. On the other hand, China is paving the way to allure or invite ASEAN to join into the economic growth.
And there seems to be a real consensus among ASEAN members saying, we don't want to have to take sides. We're neutral in this. We just want to do good business.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Ross, because here's the thing. When ASEAN was established, there was one particular treaty, and I took a look at there were about 8 or 9 treaties they signed since the beginning. Well, one of them got my interest, was the treaty that was signed in 1971.
That was really an important one.
It was, because indeed in that treaty, ASEAN members pledged to always be neutral and seek peace. They are not into the alliances of this and that. As a matter of fact, one of their treaty also banned ASEAN nations from building nuclear weapons.
You know, you take a look at the wisdom of that,
Yeah.
and it is guaranteed that they're not going to be stuck in the middle of some terrible conflict.
Well, they don't want a dominion from any. They don't want a dominion from the West or the US. They don't want a dominion from China either. So the advantage China has is that ASEAN became now number one partner to China. Trade partners, that is. So you can just see, because one thing you need to know is that not all ASEAN countries are fully developed.
Clearly.
No, there are
Cambodia,
some.
Laos, and so on.
Yeah, there are some that is still decades away. So to them, getting on a wagon with China for the infrastructure, it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal, and their future prosperity is dependent on how they're dealing with China.
That's correct, and I can think of an example of the Philippines, for example. And this is why Philippines play and we're going to dig deeper into this as we continue our discussion here, why the Philippines is very, very crucial into this aspect. But also has to do with the economic incentives. So when President Duterte went to China about 2 years ago or so, he got a pledge from China for $24 billion to build infrastructure. China did indeed build some infrastructure in Mindanao, and I think something also, either a railway or a subway or something like some infrastructure of sort pertaining to transportation in Manila. So the Philippines is thinking about it in terms of economic opportunities. And this is where that rivalry, it's becoming now more tense. But ASEAN, I believe, they are caught in the middle. They want to maintain their relationship with the US, of course, but also China is the neighbor. China is the big consuming, big market, and they don't want to be left out economically speaking.
You take a look at the tonnage of fruit and vegetables coming out of ASEAN, you go, my God, that's enormous.
Exactly. I just looked at something about Vietnam sending pineapple or kiwi or something like that to massive amount to China's market.
When you start talking about 100,000 tons of some produce,
Exactly.
That's a lot of money to those economies.
So this is why this rivalry, I believe, and again, this is my personal opinion, I believe that China has the upper hand. Because China, the reason why they invited the foreign ministers of the ASEAN country to China is because they wanted to meet face to face.
Right.
And that's the right diplomacy for them to approach it. Later along, they are assisting with these vaccinations for the pandemic and so forth. So China also engaging in a vaccine diplomacy, if you will. So, which is, that's part of what they want to do to get ASEAN countries to subscribe to China's economic growth. And they're seeing that. And one example we can mention about this one is South Korea.
Oh boy, did they do an about face.
Exactly. We all remember, and we did a show on this one here before. But you take the example of India or the example of Australia. We all see, especially with Australia.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we all know where the economy of Australia right now is, because of part of it has to do with the tensions with China and so forth. So ASEAN countries strike me as pragmatic in thinking in terms of we better stay clear of any, But also, ASEAN does not recognize its own strength, if I may add this one. I don't think so, Ross. They are aware of it.
How are you seeing that?
Well, I'm seeing in a way that they can tip the balance one way or another. Because once again, economically speaking, you cannot ignore a $3 trillion economy.
Oh, you cannot.
You cannot ignore a market base of 650 million consumers. And as a matter of fact, some estimates suggest that, and we will have a link for you at the bottom of the description where we get the stats. They are predicting by 2050, ASEAN is going to become the third global economy.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So
I mean, we take a look at all these developing economies, and you take a look at, well, it's going to be Japan, it's going to be China, it's going to be Russia, the United States. That is not going to be the future.
yeah, and those dynamics are, and this is why the rivalry between the United States and China, when it comes down to Southeast Asia, is intensifying. We don't hear much about it, but it is going on behind the scenes. The U.S. is pushing as hard as it could, geopolitically that is, and China is pushing back as hard as it could. But also for China, there are some incentives because of the idea of what's going on with the South China Sea and so forth.
As you and I have said over and over again, some of this certainly looks like it's inevitably going to happen.
Yeah.
In terms of China's going to be the central powerhouse in Asia, and everyone's going to have to make some accommodation to be with them, one way or another.
Well, there is that argument now that ASEAN countries still have some disagreement with China regarding South China Sea, and they are, and I am sure they're working out those details among themselves in a face-to-face way, rather than getting into conflicts or whatever, because it's a win-win for everybody.
Right. As you and I have laughed many times, what we're seeing is every country is should be looking out for its own best interest. And so we're going to see conflicts arise. Of course we are.
Yes, that's correct.
And how seriously are we going to take them? Especially if people are coming to the table and talking about it. We've referred to it. How long did it take the investment deal in Europe to come to fruition? 7 years of negotiation, but they kept talking until they found a win-win scenario for everybody.
Yeah.
I want to expect these things to be resolved in Southeast Asia the same way.
Yeah, and that's what they are engaging in right now. But also, there is one thing you need to understand as to why China is reaching out to the ASEAN, because the security of the waterways. In the
how important is that?
Yeah, and the reason for that is because China imports about 80% of its oil comes through those waters. But also China exports about 40% of its export that goes through those waters. So
they cannot afford a bottleneck in there.
No, they can't.
Or a stoppage of transport.
And this is where I see the role of Philippines comes in.
Oh, very important.
But also China is in talks with Thailand regarding building some sort of a bridge of sort, because my thinking is that China wants to have another outlet, if you will, to the Strait of Malacca. Because those are choking points in China, and they want to secure that one. This is why you see in this, shall we say, rapprochement between China and ASEAN, to the point that it's putting ASEAN in limbo here. Which direction they're going to go? Are they going to go with the US? Are they going to go with China? And based on what I read so far, Ross, all the indications suggest that ASEAN is leaning towards China because of the economic incentives.
Makes perfect sense. You take a look at the numbers we presented a few minutes ago, and it's almost like, do they have a choice?
They do. They do have a choice, but if they are to tie themselves to the U.S., the only choice they have on that aspect, it will be from a military perspective. That's about it. From an economic, which they need more of, because their infrastructure is now in, not all of them, there are some countries there that they need some. China provides that kind of thing. Mind you also that the U.S. did not show up in the ASEAN meeting for the last 3 years.
3 years.
So that sends a signal to the ASEAN that maybe the U.S. is not interested. Also, the U.S. does not have ambassadors in 4 countries of ASEAN. As of today, they don't have a U.S. ambassador there. I don't remember the countries which ones. There were 4 of them.
Well, what it says is you're not important enough for us to have an embassy.
Exactly, and that's how they are interpreting certain things. So China is capitalizing on that by reaching out to them. This is the reason why China invited the foreign ministers of ASEAN to come to.
Talking about the military involvement here, and the United States says, well, we can export that. Do you see any military threats going on in the countries in ASEAN? with each other or outside, even outside of ASEAN?
No, not with each other, but what you notice is, for example, the Philippines.
Yeah.
And the reason why the Philippines play a key role into this, because of how the population see itself vis-a-vis the US, and how President Duterte see himself vis-a-vis China.
Oh, there's some real diversity going on.
Yeah,
there
there are. People have always in Philippines, based on, I've met some Filipino people, I've known some throughout the years and conversed with them and so forth. They always lean towards the United States, towards the West. Well, since the arrival of Duterte in 2016, right away he got closer to China. That raised the flag in the United States. Why is that? Because militarily, Philippines play a crucial role, or will play a crucial role in case of a conflict, military conflict between the US and China. Because Philippines, in this case, will become the forward basis for the US. And Duterte does not want to have Philippines be used for rotational military for the US for that purpose. So this is where I see the personal tensions that could arise, but so far President Duterte made it clear he is not interested in allowing the Philippines to be used as a rotation for the U.S. military.
He's been really upfront with it and very public about it as well.
Well, yes, because of not the concerns, but he wanted to have those infrastructure built in Philippines. Mm-hmm. That's like any head of state will have to think of the national interest of the country, and let alone that the Philippines and the Philippines has been dragging its feet on the. There is a military agreement between the U.S. and the Philippines, and that's a sign for Philippines is not interested in allowing the U.S. to have rotations on Philippines, and the U.S. of course did not treat a Philippine as a true or close ally, if you will, when they just sent them the F-16s that's been signed on since the 80s. Well, F-16s, as you know, is the old...
Well, that's 40-year-old technology.
Yeah, so...
And anyone that Philippines would be in conflict with is going to have new weapons from either China or Russia.
That's correct. And Philippines looking at that as, okay, for example, the U.S. is providing, for example, Egypt, Jordan, some other countries, allies with, or close friends, whatever you want to call them, with the up-to-date technology. And the U.S. arguments for not moving forward with the F-18 is that Philippines would not be able to afford the maintenance for F-18s because it's a high-tech. Philippines did not build its Air Force.
So they really can't technologically support that very sophisticated kind of weaponry.
That was the arguments the U.S. made, but at the same time is
yeah, who knows,
whatever that is. So.
But what the bottom line is, they didn't get the more advanced weapons.
No, they did not.
That's the bottom line.
And this is what led Duterte to start to think in terms of maybe ties with China to improve the infrastructure will go far long than focusing only on a military aspects of it.
And we know that countries that side with the U.S. against China pay a very dear economic price.
Well, Australia is an example of
that. Boy, is that a clear example.
India is another example. So, and that becomes the question of the Quad, because there are some, we're asking, will some ASEAN countries join the Quad? I don't see that happening. I do not see it happening because the Quad in itself is, you don't hear much about it. Yes, it exists between those four countries, Australia, Japan, the US, and India. Even though Japan did not confirm, is wishy-washy about it. South Korea made it clear they don't want to join the Quad. But the Quad itself is irrelevant.
Exactly.
To me, that's how I see it, because...
And if Australia does a regime change, they might not be very much interested.
No. And Australia is 9 hours away from China in case of a conflict, so I don't see all this stuff. So, but there is one key information that you need to know about. It has to do with whether this could escalate to a Cold War level or not. And that in itself will become, yes, it could, but not the same way we understand the Cold War that took place between the United States and the Soviet Union. This type of a Cold War it's going to have to be on a technological level.
Exactly.
And that has to do with the microchip. That is the bottom line to it. Are both countries moving into that direction? Yes, they are. Will we see a display of that? Possibly. But also China is taking precautions now with some ASEAN members to start build the infrastructure for the microchip. Because here in the United States, there is already an indication for the shortage for microchips for the next 2 years. So you can just see some industries is going to be suffering big time. So
Automotive is just one of many examples.
that's correct, yeah, and that's where they are moving towards. So, but the whole idea about this, what you need to understand about this ASEAN, about this rivalry between the United States and China when it comes down to ASEAN, has nothing to do with ASEAN itself. It has to do with Taiwan. The reason being because any recent joint statements that you hear, either from South Korea, either from Japan, the G7, NATO, all of them will have to mention Taiwan. So China is taking that seriously in a sense that we better make sure that the relationship with the neighbors is where it needs to be. Because obviously you do not want to have military presence in Philippines.
Right.
Yeah. But also Philippines understand they will become a target should there is a conflict between China and the US. Same thing for Australia and
Yeah, and when Duarte says, you expect me to stand up to China? Don't ask me to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they're looking at, the interest of where things are going moving forward. So basically that Cold War, it's not going to be played out the same way you and I understand it, and I'm sure you're well aware of it. Yeah, but it will be a technological one, and that's where things are moving into that direction. That's what I say.
If you were to say the number one takeaway from this conversation today, what would you say for our viewers? What's the number one takeaway?
Well, the whole key to all this is one thing you need to understand is that the United States is a consuming society.
Exactly.
It's a consumption, not a production. We don't produce much. We produce weapons, of course, but to those ASEAN countries, they're thinking in terms of economy. They're thinking in terms of foreign direct investments. And China can put in that money. As a matter of fact, Japan now is trying to invest in Philippines for some money, whatever. But China is already putting the money in. Yes, some infrastructure have not been developed yet. They are working through that. But ASEAN, as a bloc, is seeing where things are going into that direction. And the last thing they want is the idea of no need for military escalation of this. That is where I see personally things going. So, yeah, that's where I see it going.
So a conclusion is that ASEAN members are dedicated to staying as neutral as possible in this while they continue to have a wonderful trade relationship with China.
That's correct. That's usually what it's
And
going.
we'll see how that turns out.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content, and please subscribe and share this video with others. As always, stay informed. Till next time.